All right, hello students. Mr. Bostrom here. Your calf friends are here as well, Bugsy and Buttermilk. But today I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about deworming and what worms are, why they're a problem, and how we can try to control them, whether they're in sheep, cows, horses, whatever livestock animal it might be. So worming is a very important thing to do. So basically, all livestock animals are susceptible to have worms, internal parasites, worms inside of their stomachs. So basically, these worms will live inside the body of the animal, and they'll just basically feed off of the animal's contents inside of their stomach. So they'll take nutrients away from the animal, they'll inhibit growth, and it's just a very unhealthy parasite to have inside of your body. So having worms generally is not good, but most livestock animals will have worms inside of them. It's just a matter of having a low count of parasitic worms inside the body. So how do cows get worms? So basically, if one cow is infected with a high count of parasitic worms, they basically have the mature worm inside of their digestive system, and when they poop onto the ground where other cows are going to be eating, in that poop they're going to have eggs of the worms. So basically, the worms will come out of the digestive system of the cow via their excrement, and it will end up on the ground. And obviously, if the cows are out on pasture, they're pooping on the grass, and other cows are going to be eating that same grass where the worms' eggs are. So the eggs can actually travel onto the grass. Then the cow comes along, eats that grass, and then that's how another cow gets infected with worms. So let's see if we can find a cow patty in this field. All right, so if we look right here, here's some fecal matter of a cow. So basically, if there is eggs inside of this cow patty, it could travel onto the grass right next to it, okay? So then as the cows come along, as they're grazing, they could eat this piece of grass right here that may have touched this fecal matter and is now infected with eggs. So the cow eats this grass, say there's eggs on it, it digests it, and now it has the eggs inside of its body. So then those eggs multiply, they mature, now they have the full parasitic worm inside of their body. And that will happen to however many, if your pasture is infected and you have 500 cows within that pasture, all 500 cows pretty much are going to get that parasitic worm if you do not deworm, if you do not care for your pasture correctly. So it's kind of an ongoing problem if it's not handled correctly. So it's very important to understand worms, how to control them, and how to prevent them. The first thing you could do if you do have worms, or you're trying to prevent an outbreak of worms inside of your animal's digestive system, is to buy a dewormer. So I just went to Tractor Supply a couple days ago. I bought this Safeguard dewormer. It was probably, I think it was $16 or $17 for 1 pound. And this says it'll deworm dairy cows, horses, beef cows, poultry like turkeys, and swine. So all the instructions are kind of on the back for dosage requirements, when and how you should deworm your animals. So I'm mostly concerned about dairy and beef cattle, considering these are two Jersey steers. So if we read this, it says, give these pellets, so just to go over this, within these pellets there is dewormer medication. So basically the calves just eat the pellets and they get the medication inside their body. There is another option where you could use a drench. So you basically use a syringe, and it's a liquid medication that you basically shove down the animal's throat, and it gets inside their body and hopefully kills the worms. But that's a little bit harder to do. Cows don't really like that. So I'm just giving them this feed right here, and it contains the medication to hopefully kill some of the worms if they have them in there. All right, so this says give these pellets at a rate of 1 pound per 1,000 pounds of body weight on the animal. So I'm guessing that these guys probably weigh about 250 to 300 pounds. So I'm giving them a 1/4 pound of this feed each. So basically half the bag. Since this is a 1 pound bag, it says down here 1 pound bag, I used half the bag, 1/4 pound each, so half a pound for both, combined for both animals. So all on here gives your instructions. You have dairy beef, you have horse, turkey, swine. So it tells you all on the bag. And then on the front, it also tells you what worms it's going to be attacking. So stomach worms, intestinal worms, all different kinds of stuff. All right, so I measured out 1/4 pound each. I used a scale just to make sure they had the right amount. It's very important that you give the right amount, because if you give too little, it might not prevent the worms from, or it might not kill the worms. And if you give too much, it might disrupt their digestive system. All right, so again, I just have in these feed bowls, and I will go ahead, slide them under the fence. They're pretty grain driven, so they'll come right over. There you go. Enjoy eating grain. So you want to make sure that they get what you put in there. You don't want to let them share. So it's as easy as that. You could also, so as I was saying, you could also use the drench, but then you need to restrain the animal. It's a little bit more uncomfortable for them to get the dewormer or the drench in their throat. So just feeding them the grain. They already get grain once a day, so they kind of enjoy this. They don't even realize that there's dewormer in it. So the next thing about how to prevent worms from getting in your pasture. So we're going to talk a little bit about pasture management and how you can actually stop worms from spreading as rapidly. All right, so as I said before, when the cows have excrement come out of their digestive system with a cow that is infected with worms, they have a cow patty that ends up on the pasture, and basically those eggs just are inside of their excrement and they spread onto the grasses around the poop. There could be worm eggs inside this poop, and it's spreading to this grass, and as the grass grows, the cows will eat it and they will take up any fecal eggs that might be inside of that poop. So one thing that you can do to prevent worms is in the hot days of summer, when it's kind of dry, obviously it's warmer, you could take your tractor and you could take kind of like a chain or something, and you could spread that poop out. So you get rid of it sitting in a paddy like that, and you kind of spread it out. By doing that, by spreading the poop out, it is actually exposing the eggs to the hot, dry weather, and it actually kills them. But when the eggs are inside of this cow patty here, they have a nice moist condition, so the eggs can thrive and they can repopulate and they can climb onto the grass. But when you spread them out in the hot sun, they dry out, they're no longer viable, and you basically kill the egg. So again, in the summer months, you could take your tractor with a chain on the back and you basically spread the poop out. Now in the springtime and fall time, that's when worm eggs usually are very bad, because the conditions, the environmental conditions are perfect, optimal for growth. It's very wet and it's kind of cool out. So that's a perfect incubator for those eggs to grow. So summertime is basically your time to try to control those eggs. Spring, fall, it's kind of harder to control it just because the conditions are more optimal for growth for those eggs. But summertime, you can try to slow that dispersal down. So one thing I did not mention about deworming is there's what we call a withdrawal period. So basically a withdrawal period is the period of time where that animal, a period of time where you give that animal the medication. So I gave the animals this medication on April 28th. The withdrawal period means that I cannot bring those animals to slaughter. So I cannot bring those animals to be cut up into meat that humans consume for 13 days. So basically 2 weeks. So it says it right here. Cannot be slaughtered within 13 days following the last treatment. So basically what that's saying is that medication, that dewormer, will stay inside the animal's body for at least 13 days. So you cannot legally bring that animal to slaughter and have it cut up and have it go onto store shelves with this medication inside of it. This is because we're trying to prevent it from getting inside of humans, and it wouldn't be healthy for us to consume that. So withdrawal period for this medication right here is 13 days. And again, I read it right on the back here, 13 days. So they need to basically wait 2 weeks if I were to bring them to the slaughterhouse. If I brought them to the slaughterhouse before those 13 days, I could get a fine, I could go to jail. I'd basically lose all that meat because it's contaminated with this antibiotic, this dewormer. So deworming cows, an adult mature cow, you can get away with deworming about once a year, maybe twice a year, but they don't need to be as often. Calves, like our cows over here, they probably should be dewormed at least 2 to 3 times a year. This is just because they have a smaller, they're smaller bodied, they don't weigh as much. So if they did have a real bad case of worms, that would really slow down their growth. So younger calves, definitely at least twice a year, sometimes 3. Older mature cows you can get away with once a year because they're a little bit bigger, they have more body weight. So an infestation of worms might not be as bad for an adult cow versus a smaller calf. So one more thing I'd like to go over is dewormer resistance. So if you deworm your cows regularly, say you do it probably more often than you should, say you do it every 2 or 3 months, so that's like 4 times a year, the worms inside the digestive system of the animal might become resistant to it. So what that means is if you give the same type of dewormer too often, the worms inside of the animal's body will actually become accustomed to it. So they're not going to die. They're going to just keep living even though that dewormer is inside that animal's body. So that's called becoming resistant. So generations of the worms keep breeding, and they eventually just become resistant to the antibiotic or medication that you're giving the animal to try to kill those worms. So they say you should use 2 or 3 different types of wormers. So you should never use the same wormer back to back. So every time you worm the calves, if we're doing it 3 times a year, you should use 3 different types of wormers. That will prevent any resistance inside the animal's body. And it's just common practice for what people do, whether you're worming horses, sheep, goats, whatever it might be. So that's called resistance. So we want to switch around the type of dewormer we're using to prevent that and keeping that animal as healthy as possible.